My name is Emily Carter, and just a few months back, I stood on the stage at the University of Washington receiving my master's degree in business administration. The room echoed with cheers from friends and classmates, their applause wrapping around me like warmth. Yet, deep down, something was missing. My parents weren't in the crowd. My sister wasn't there either. And the ache wasn't simply because they hadn't shown up to share in my success. It was because they never thought I'd achieve it at all. For as long as I can remember, my parents placed all their faith in Ashley. She was their pride, the favored one, whose every wish was instantly granted. Dance lessons, trips abroad, even her first car, whatever she wanted, they delivered without hesitation. Meanwhile, I was taught that life was supposed to be hard. Sacrifice was expected of me. I worked long shifts at a cafe, saving every dollar for tuition, while Ashley's path was paved smooth, free of hurdles. I'll never forget the day I told my parents I had been accepted into the MBA program. My father's response was cold and detached. That's good, but don't expect us to help financially. I hadn't expected their support, but hearing those words still cut deep. I already knew they wouldn't attend my graduation. So, when I got a call immediately after the ceremony, an unexpected one from my grandparents' lawyer, I didn't know what to think. His voice was calm, but his words hit me like a tidal wave. Emily, your grandparents left their entire estate to you. I froze, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. My grandparents trusted me. They believed in me, something my parents never had. But in a family built on favoritism and disappointment, I knew this inheritance wouldn't go unnoticed. And I wasn't prepared for the storm it would stir. Before we go on, please subscribe to the channel and share where you're listening from. Growing up in the Carter household was a constant struggle for acknowledgement. My parents, Richard and Linda, appeared to the town as the perfect couple. Dad owned the local hardware store, Mom worked at the library, and we lived in a 2-story house in a small Oregon coastal town where everyone knew everyone's business. On the outside, we looked picture perfect. But behind closed doors, the truth was far from it. Ashley, my younger sister, had always been the center of attention. From the earliest days, everything revolved around her, while I was taught to stay quiet, step back, and let her shine. She never had to worry about money or effort. If she wanted something, she got it. Dance lessons? Done. A trip to Europe? No questions asked. I, on the other hand, worked late nights in a cafe just to afford my books and tuition, always reminded that life is tough. I learned quickly that nothing would come easily, especially from my family. No matter how hard I tried to meet their expectations, it was never enough. I still remember my undergraduate graduation. My parents showed up an hour late because Ashley had to buy a costume for one of her performances. They took a few pictures, and before the ceremony even ended, they were gone. But that wasn't even the hardest part. When I got into the MBA program, my dad barely reacted. "Good for you," he muttered. "Just don't expect us to pay for it." I never thought they would, but hearing him actually say it still hit me hard. Every achievement I worked for, getting into a top university, graduating with honors, was constantly dimmed by Ashley's effortless accomplishments. She was always the one our parents beamed over. I was the afterthought. It was like I didn't exist. I felt unseen, like I was fading into the background. Everything shifted, though, when I got a call from Samuel Pierce, the attorney managing my grandparents' estate. The $1 million inheritance wasn't just money, it was acknowledgement. It was the first time anyone in my family truly saw me for who I was. I wasn't the compliant daughter who stayed quiet for the sake of peace. I was capable. I was deserving. But in my family, anything meaningful turned into a battleground. And I was about to learn exactly how far they'd go to take what belonged to me. When I first learned about the inheritance, I was overwhelmed with gratitude. But that feeling faded quickly as reality crept in. This wasn't just about assets. It was about finally standing up to the people who always made me feel small. I knew exactly how my parents and Ashley would see it. Another prize to snatch, something they believed they were entitled to. They'd been draining me for years. But this time I was ready. The first thing I did was call Daniel Hart, a lawyer I'd worked with before on some tricky property matters. calm and precise. He listened carefully as I laid out my family's history. Without hesitation, he said, "You need to secure that inheritance now." His recommendation was clear. We've set up an irrevocable trust. If anyone tries to go after it, he told me, they won't have a legal leg to stand on. The idea of the trust felt like building a fortress, one that would preserve what my grandparents had left me. I was determined to keep it far out of reach from the people who had never truly supported me. Just imagining Ashley or my parents showing up with fake paperwork, trying to steal what wasn't theirs, it made my stomach turn. But I knew this wasn't just about defending the present. It was about locking down a future where they had no control over me. Setting up the trust wasn't simple. It took weeks of back and forth legal meetings and exhausting paperwork. I spent long hours in Daniel's office, combing through every piece to make sure there were no cracks. Eventually, we transferred the property title into the trust. The utilities were transferred under an LLC, and every bank account my grandparents once had was closed and reopened in the trust name. Still, I kept my mouth shut. I told no one, not my friends, not my parents, and definitely not Ashley. I knew the moment I let them in, they'd see it as an opportunity. They wouldn't grasp my need for security. They wouldn't realize this was about safeguarding what was rightfully mine, something entrusted to me by the only people who ever truly loved and believed in me. As I signed the last document, a small smile tugged at my lips. This was my first real move toward taking ownership of my own life, and I wasn't about to let anyone take that from me. But deep down, I knew the toughest part was still ahead. Eventually, they would find out. And when they did, I had to be ready. The first few months after securing the trust felt like a brief calm. I kept my routine steady, continued working in Seattle and driving back on weekends to check in on the house. But I was well aware it was only a matter of time before my family uncovered the truth. And when that moment came, I knew it would get messy. That Christmas, I braced myself for something to happen. But I never imagined it would play out the way it did. That morning, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was unusually cheerful. "Emily, we need to talk about the house. It's time the family had a discussion about what your grandparents left behind. We should honor their legacy." Immediately, alarms went off in my head. The phrase, "honor their legacy," sounded scripted, like something practiced to guilt me into giving up what I had worked so hard to protect. Still, I kept my tone composed, replying evenly, "I'm busy, Mom. Maybe after the holidays." But she wasn't letting it drop. Later that day, I got a text from Ashley. It was casual on the surface, vague and friendly, but it hinted at what was coming. She asked if I'd thought about selling the house and splitting the proceeds. She even floated the idea of using the money to open a nail salon. I saw the signs clearly now. They wanted a piece of the inheritance, and they weren't going to stop until they got it. That evening, the confrontation hit full force. A knock came at the door. My parents were there with Ashley and her kids in tow, wearing polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They stepped inside, and before I could make sense of it all, Ashley dropped the bomb. "The house is in my name now. Mom and Dad sorted it. You'll need to move out. I'm renovating and selling." I stood frozen. The nerve. Her words struck like a slap. And yet, somehow, they expected me to take it calmly, to just agree and get out of the way. But I wasn't the same Emily anymore. I wasn't the girl who always gave in. "I've heard you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "But no, Ashley. This is my home, and I'm not leaving." They hadn't seen that coming. For the first time ever, I saw it, real shock in their eyes. I wasn't playing the role of obedient daughter anymore. This time, I was ready to stand my ground. The days that followed were tense, but I didn't let them see how much it shook me. I knew exactly what I had to do, and it wasn't to argue or get tangled up in their manipulative games. It was time to prove just how wrong they were about me. The next morning, I called Daniel. The moment I explained what had happened, I could hear the resolve in his voice. "We've got this," he told me. "Standing your ground was the right call, Emily. Now let's make sure they can't lay a finger on what's yours." Over the following weeks, I worked closely with him and Sonia, gathering every shred of evidence, closing every possible loophole, and making sure the trust was airtight. It wasn't just about safeguarding my grandparents' home anymore. It had become about taking back control of my life, in ways I never had before. I refused to let them pull my strings again. No one was going to strip this away from me. Then, the day I'd been waiting for finally arrived. The moment I'd prove them all wrong, once and for all. It was a still, quiet morning when Daniel called me. "It's done," he said plainly. "The deed is yours." A small smile crept across my face. This wasn't just a win, it was a declaration. I drove to my grandparents' house, the only place that had ever truly felt like home, and paused for a long time at the front door. The house stood silent, filled only with memories. But now it belonged to me. My inheritance, my legacy, my peace. Reaching into my bag, I pulled out the deed. When my parents and Ashley came back, convinced they'd come out on top, I'd show it to them. The second they laid eyes on that deed, their expressions would drop. As I handed it over, I smiled and said, "You were right about one thing, Dad. I couldn't afford it until I could." Standing there in front of the house, I realized it wasn't just about owning the property. I had taken back something far more meaningful. Control over my own life, something they'd stripped away from me for years. The house wasn't just bricks and wood. It represented everything I had fought through, every compromise, every internal battle I'd overcome. I'd spent years trying to earn my family's approval, molding myself to fit their expectations. They saw me as fragile, as someone who'd always follow their lead. But I wasn't that person anymore. I didn't need their acceptance. I had carved out my own path, and this home, this trust was the proof. For so long, I had been the one who kept quiet, who never asked for anything. I had watched my parents shower Ashley with affection, opportunity, and freedom, while I worked tirelessly for every small gain. But now, I had finally freed myself from their grip. They underestimated me, and now they'd see just how wrong they were. As I stood on my grandparents' porch, listening to the waves crashing in the distance, a deep calm settled over me. I had stepped into my power. I was no longer the daughter who gave up everything for her family. I wasn't going to stand by while others took what I had earned. I had fought for this, not just for a house, but for what it represented. I had defended something bigger than property. I had stood up for my worth. And in that moment, I knew I had won. Not just the fight over a home, but the fight for my freedom, my identity, and my peace of mind. This marked the start of a new chapter, one where I wouldn't be silenced or cast aside. And the greatest part? I had finally learned how to protect what truly mattered.